B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday, November 19th, 2019. The nation of Sweden and its prosecutors have finally ended the persecution of Julian Assange. After 9 long years, and the threat of that investigation that could lead to extradition to Sweden, that could have in turn led to his extradition to the United States, led Julian Assange to hole up in the Embassy of Ecuador in London until he was booted out this past April. And yesterday I reported to you on the remarkable report from the UN rapporteur, who clearly concluded in 11 different legal points that the persecution, the investigation of Julian Assange was misguided. It was leaked in ways that smeared him from the get-go. The term rape was used, even though the complaints that he faced arose from consensual encounters with women who complained under Sweden's different laws that he violated their rights by having sex with them without wearing a condom. They did not call it rape. And they went to authorities because, since they had had unprotected sex with him and they discovered in their conversations these 2 women, they wanted him to take a test for STDs. So it was a health issue, not a criminal issue. But it was spun up by the U.S. media, by the Obama administration, and by the Swedish prosecutors, who opened and closed the case several times. And we hope that this is actually the end of it. So Eva Marie Persson, Persson, Sweden's Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions, said the evidence is not strong enough to form the basis of an indictment. She said that today. In such a situation, the preliminary investigation should be discontinued, and that is what has happened. The person said that investigators had again questioned the individuals who were interviewed way back in 2010, talked to 2 additional people. We don't know who they are, but they'd not been previously interviewed, and investigators had found the accusers credible, their statements reliable, but some parts of the testimonies were contradictory. However, she says, well, let me read the whole quote here from Persson. Her statements, referring to Anna Arden, her statements have been coherent, extensive, and detailed. However, my overall assessment is that the evidential situation has been weakened to such an extent there is no longer any reason to continue the investigation. Now, they had dropped the investigation, declaring it closed in 2017. But after Assange was held by British authorities for bail jumping, one of the alleged victims asked for it to be revisited, according to the prosecutor. And so a representative of WikiLeaks, the chief editor now, Kristen Hrafsson, that's a tough name, Hrafnsson, quoted, Sweden has dropped its preliminary investigation into Assange for the 3rd time after reopening it without any new evidence or information. Let us now focus on the threat Assange has been warning about for years, the belligerent prosecution of the United States and the threat it poses to the First Amendment. For background, I recommend a good piece by Kevin Gosztola, published at Shadowproof today, before this announcement from the Swedish prosecutor, and his article was critical of Eva Marie Persson because the hint issued yesterday was that Sweden would not respond to the UN rapporteur, Mr. Melzer. Yesterday, Swedish officials said the government has no further observations to make. And they said that they would hold a press conference today to further, and Gostola calls it an opportunity to further justify the drawn-out investigation while dodging the accountability demanded by a UN human rights official. So that particular case is closed. We hope. We hope it's closed for good. But I want to underscore that I haven't seen any coverage of Melzer's report in corporate media in this country, and I've been looking for it. And we'll see how they play this development now that this particular part of the episode appears to be over. But I want to direct your attention to two different reports published by the New York Times in the last 48 hours. One is a joint project with The Intercept. And you'll recall that James Risen worked for the New York Times. He left for The Intercept. He had won a Pulitzer at the Times. And he, of course, was central to the prosecution of CIA officer Jeffrey Sterling. The phone records of their calls were used as circumstantial evidence to put Sterling in prison for several years. And I don't blame Risen for that. I want to be clear. So there is this collaboration between the Times and The Intercept. It's a very strong story. The Iran cables. Secret documents show how Tehran wields power in Iraq. And I don't find any fault with the coverage. They went on for, I printed it out, 25 pages, detailing the role that Iran plays in Iraq today, that one of the top military leaders of Iran, Major General Qasem Soleimani, the head of the powerful Quds Force, which is at the top of the Revolutionary Guard, has made frequent visits to Iraq, even during the turbulent protests that have turned deadly in recent weeks. And they show that Iran has deep influence with the current Prime Minister, Mahdi, and that a lot of the members of his cabinet are loyal to Tehran. Now, this is something we've known about, that when Bush invaded Iraq, he essentially made Iran a much more powerful force in the region. And we've known through the, Muqtada al-Sadr, the Butter Brigade. The influence of Iran is long-running and continues to be a factor today. So I encourage you to read the report. As I say, I take no issue with its validity. But it is based on leaked documents. Documents that would have come from WikiLeaks if Julian Assange weren't locked up at the Belmarsh prison. Or at least we can suspect that. Quote, now leaked Iranian documents offer a detailed portrait of just how aggressively Tehran has worked to embed itself into Iraqi affairs. The documents are contained in an archive of secret Iranian intelligence cables obtained by The Intercept and shared with the New York Times. They are trafficking in leaked documents. These documents were presumably leaked by somebody in Iraq, possibly in Iran. Julian Assange sat atop an enterprise that was devoted to exposing secrets. The New York Times is doing the same kind of journalism that Julian Assange attempted to do and has been, indicted under America's Espionage Act for. Exhibit 2, Sunday, front page story in the New York Times. A lengthy piece. It goes on for 2 full pages in the inside of the front section, detailing the gruesome and brutal crackdown by the Beijing government on the Muslim minority Uyghurs in Xinjiang province. And this is an issue that I care a lot about. I think that these are concentration camps. They are trying to change the minds of these Uyghurs and turn them into some sort of Chinese zombies. And I applaud the New York Times for continuing to report on this. It's not a big issue for the Trump administration. They don't care about Muslims being marginalized and badly treated in China. But once again, this blockbuster story is based on 403 pages of internal documents that have been shared with the New York Times, We don't know the source. I expect it's someone in China. We are told that they translated the materials that they published and retyped them so that the documents wouldn't give away the identity of their source. This is substantive journalism. It is based on leaks from unnamed sources. That's what WikiLeaks does. That's what it did. That's what Assange did. The New York Times took the fruits of WikiLeaks' work. They published it, at least selectively, and they benefited from it. Are they champions of the rights of Julian Assange? No. And so that hypocrisy, that we see major media outlets continuing to use the same tactics, techniques, methods as WikiLeaks, and Assange is a criminal rotting away in a prison in England, and when he is finally extradited to the U.S., he'll be put on a show trial where many Americans will act like a lynch mob and decide that he is a spy, he's a traitor. He's not even an American citizen. He has no obligation to the United States and its secrecy laws. He's an Australian. But that doesn't matter because he's already been tried and convicted in our media. And while I'm railing against the New York Times, they've done it again. A fresh smear, yellow journalism aimed at Tulsi Gabbard, candidate for president. And last time, Lisa Lehrer sat down at the keyboard to smear Tulsi Gabbard. That was a doozy. Today, she co-authored a piece with Nicholas Casey, and the dateline is Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And what they've done here is use the voices of New Hampshire voters to advance their smears, their smear points, that's like talking points, only smears, of Tulsi Gabbard. So they open with Ray Brunel, retired Air Force veteran. He appreciates Gabbard's military background, praised her cool and calm performance. But the thing that impressed him was that she took on Hillary Clinton. They got in a little tit-for-tat clash there, he said. I'm trying to recall what it was that prompted Hillary to say that Republicans were grooming Gabbard for a third-party run. Perhaps it was Tulsi's moderate middle-of-the-road politics. Then the narrative takes over. Even as other long-shot candidates in this historically large primary field have dropped out, Gabbard is standing strong in spite of relatively modest support from voters nationally. She's managed to parlay her feud with Hillary into an extended presence in the political spotlight, delighting Republicans like Mr. Brunel and independents and conservative Democrats who dislike the Clintons. Now, what about me? I don't fit in any of those categories. I am independent. I'm not conservative. I'm not a Democrat. I do dislike the Clintons. But that's not the basis of my interest in Tulsi Gabbard's candidacy. It's that she opposes regime change wars, and she's willing to say it. But that doesn't meet with the approval of the Times. They support the regime change wars. They support the military-industrial complex. And listen to this faint praise. In a moment marked by fractured politics and the declining control of the political establishment, Gabbard's non-traditional positions and willingness to take on a major figure in her own party are a large part of her appeal. Supporters praise Gabbard's unorthodox platform, a mix of non-interventionist foreign policy, liberal social policy, and libertarian leanings on issues like drug decriminalization. On some topics, she echoes arguments typically made by Republicans. That's damning, isn't it? Like her claim that her speech was stifled by the big technology platforms and her frequent complaints of media bias. They're real. She ends up on Fox and on RT, and then she gets hammered by it from the corporate media that doesn't invite her to appear. All right, so then we switch to a New Hampshire Republican, Tom Rath. There's a group up here that prefers the unorthodox, and maybe in her candidacy they find a voice for it. This kind of candidate, sometimes it almost becomes cult-like. Well, those are dog whistle words to talk about what some people know about her early childhood, the guru or whoever that guy was who was influential on her father and her family. But she's not a child anymore. And while I am curious and in some ways concerned about the elements of her past and her father's influence, I take her at face value. And I take her for the positions that she espouses. So I've linked to this yellow journalism, and you can read it for yourselves. Also, this is a very interesting source. Somebody linked to me to it on Facebook. It's the Federalist Society's website. And they picked up a story I haven't seen anywhere else. Elizabeth Warren gave an interview to Pod Save America, and they asked her about Venezuela and Nicolas Maduro. Let's quote from the senator from Massachusetts. Start with the fact that Maduro is obviously a dictator. He's terrible. He's stolen this election. It's a nightmare for the people of Venezuela. So that's part one. All right, let me break down part one. Let me unpack it for you. He's obviously a dictator. I think that is a subjective term in the eyes of beholders. He's terrible. All right, that's your opinion. He's stolen this election. That is flatly untrue. It's a nightmare for the people of Venezuela. That is largely because of the U.S. sanctions and our attempt to take down the socialist government of Venezuela. All right, she continued. Part two, this notion of using our diplomatic tools, I'm all for it. I think recognition, I think getting our allies to do it, it's a way to bring diplomatic pressure. She continued, I support economic sanctions. But we got to turn the dial some here. We have to offer humanitarian help at the same time. We can't let people starve. It doesn't matter that Maduro is willing to let his own people starve. Then she went on to say she supports Juan Guaido and recognizing him as the legitimate president of Venezuela. And I just regard this as ignorance on her part. I don't think she focuses on foreign policy. She hears about it from her advisors. And in the voice of the Federalist reporter here who wrote this, supporting diplomatic measures, economic sanctions, and recognizing Guaido as the Venezuelan president aren't just Warren's ideas, but are all initiatives supported by President Donald Trump and former National Security Advisor John Bolton. And that raises the question for me, where the hell is Elliott Abrams these days? He's kind of disappeared. Then again, the right-wing Federalist goes on to say, Warren's position is a stark contrast to Bernie Sanders. This may be a chance for Warren to distance herself from her fellow socialist ideologue. Sanders is known for upholding socialist dictators for the sake of maintaining socialism as a legitimate form of governance. He has done so recently by upholding Bolivia's fraudulent elections. Oh, boy. While Sanders previously acknowledged the failures of Venezuela, he doesn't believe Guaido should be the president. A quote from Bernie, despite his ideology, what we need to see is democracy established in Venezuela. That does not mean deciding that some politician is the new president who never won any election. Well, Bernie's at least got his facts straight. Elizabeth Warren? Not so much. The really obnoxious news that surfaced yesterday late was a news conference by Secretary of State Pompeo. And he announced that the U.S. is reversing a 40-year policy and will no longer regard the illegal settlements that Israel builds in the West Bank on Palestinian land as illegal. This is another outrageous giveaway. Benjamin Netanyahu is desperately struggling to form some sort of unity government so he can stay on and avoid the corruption charges he faces. And where's Donald Trump, that worldwide global corruption fighter, on Bibi's problems? At any rate, this is just over the top. And if you recall, the last move that Obama made in December of 2016 was he instructed our UN Security Council member to vote present and not to oppose a resolution condemning continuing expansion of illegal Israeli settlements on Palestinian land. And had he taken a stronger position and won earlier, we might be in a different space right now. But this is another, like I say, a big giveaway, and it delivers what Netanyahu threatened right before his most recent attempt to get elected and hold on to power, where he said that he would annex as much as 30% of those settlements and make them a part of the state of Israel. That chops up the West Bank, making any possible two-state solution almost impossible. And what's really outrageous from Pompeo is that he claimed that, hey, this wasn't working, and we have the Jared Kushner secret plan that nobody knows about to bring the parties together. All they've done is one giveaway to Israel after another. Then they cut funding to the Palestinians through the UN. And it is just, it is so unacceptable that the U.S. has operated in this manner. In Hong Kong, it appears that the protests may be winding down. The latest is about 50 protesters remain holed up in that university, Hong Kong Polytech. 1,100 protesters have been arrested. And some of the students there escaped by jumping across a bridge. They tried to flee through a sewage line. But it appears that the central core of the Hong Kong protesters are now in custody. 200 of them, of those protesters who left the campus, were underage, and at least presently, it's said that they are not going to be charged. And as we talked earlier about the incredible treatment of the Uyghurs as second-class citizens and, creatures who need to be reprogrammed, it raises the question of how Beijing will respond to these security challenges, one in their far western region in Xinjiang and one in the far eastern section there in Hong Kong. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like David Kaufman, who just renewed his annual. Thanks, David. Janet Price, Jason Ferguson, and Peter J. Hoffmeister. I thank each and every one of you, and it's my way of inviting others to become subscribers. There have been a few new ones signing up lately, so let's keep that going. Visit peterbcollins.com. There's a menu tab. Click on it. Then click on Become a Subscriber. You hit the sign-up page, and it's easy for you to choose a level of support that's comfortable for you, and you will have my enduring gratitude. So the impeachment investigation hearings continue on Capitol Hill. Today it was Alexander Vindman, but don't call him Mr. He is Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, and he brushed back the minority ranking member, Devin Nunes, who called him Mr. Actually, I thought that was kind of cool to see him show some spine there, and that he wasn't intimidated by the Republican attack dogs. So Vindman has confirmed reporting that he had drafted talking points for Trump ahead of the April phone call with the president, the newly elected president of Ukraine, and that the talking points included corruption, but Trump didn't use any of the talking points. And Vindman indicated that Ukrainian corruption was not much of a priority for Trump, at least not back there in April. Now, the Republican counsel is pretty effective, and he did get Vindman to admit that he has never been in the same room with Donald Trump, never talked to him directly, and so that promotes the Republican talking points that, Trump doesn't know all these people, and especially if they say things he doesn't like, he's never heard of them and has no knowledge. So a few things surfaced. One is that there was a phone call between Vice President Pence and Zelensky on the 18th of September, but we're not allowed to know much about this because the vice president is claiming that they discussed national security matters, so it is secret, and that led Ms. Williams to say that she couldn't discuss it. Likewise, the Republicans tried to pin down Vindman on who he talked to about his concerns about the nature of the July 25th phone call. And Vindman said, well, I did disclose it to other people who have the same security clearances that I do. And he named one of them, this guy Holmes, who testified. I can't remember if it was in public or behind closed doors, but Holmes has said that, I got to take that back. I had the wrong name here. It was George Kent, the Deputy Assistant Secretary at the State Department, and the other was an individual in the intelligence community, and Vindman declined to name him. And that's when the Republicans tried to squeeze, and they complained that they can't call Hunter Biden to testify, and that the Democrats are just so unfair in all this. And so Devin Nunes is trying to get him to explain or to blow the cover of the whistleblower. And as you know, I'm uncomfortable with this CIA whistleblower. The fact that he still works there means he's not really a whistleblower. And I think it's silly for the Democrats to continue to keep him off stage in that soundproof booth. But that's how they're playing it. And so far, they're controlling the game. Other notes from today's hearings. I've got them on many different pieces of paper here. Jim Jordan cited critical comments about Vindman's judgment from two other impeachment witnesses, Tim Morrison and Fiona Hill. And so Vindman read a performance evaluation that Fiona Hill wrote that was only full of glowing comments. Also, Vindman revealed that on a trip to Ukraine earlier this year, he was offered the job of defense minister of Ukraine. Now, that does raise eyebrows, and it allows Republicans to question his loyalty. But the Obama administration inserted a Ukrainian-born American as the finance minister after we installed Petro Poroshenko, the Candyman, following the U.S.-backed coup against Yanukovych in 2014. So, anyway, he turned down the offer, he said, 3 times, and he did report it to his bosses, so it doesn't appear that he has run afoul of any regulations. Now, one of the long-running memes in American media is that Trump is a Putin puppet and that he's soft on Moscow and he does their bidding all the time. And that has enraged Caitlin Johnstone, the Observer from Australia. And at Consortium News today, she has published in response to CNN's listicle, where they tallied 25 times Trump was soft on Russia, and she has 25 times when Trump was either tough on Russia or, as she puts it, Trump has actually been consistently reckless in the one area where a U.S. president must, he's turning the page, absolutely always maintain a steady hand. And he's been doing so with zero resistance from either party. So Johnstone lists, I'm just going to read the first 5 here. Implementing a nuclear posture review with a more aggressive stance toward Russia. That's true. Also, we dropped out of the, intermediate range treaty. Number 2, arming Ukraine. Of course, the Obama administration wouldn't give lethal weapons to Ukraine. We've given them these Javelin missiles, but told them they can't use them. Number 3, bombing Syria. Number 4, staging coup attempts in Venezuela. That is opposed by Russia. And as I mentioned a moment ago, withdrawing from the INF Treaty. I've linked to Johnstone's piece, and you can read all 25 of her cases of Trump not being easy on Russia. That's in the show file at peterbcollins.com. Meanwhile, those amateur spies, Rudy Giuliani and Gordon Sondland, are getting slammed by people in the intel game for using their cell phones and believing that running WhatsApp while you're outside the United States protects the confidentiality, the privacy of your conversations. And so this came up in the testimony of Tim Morrison, who has resigned from the National Security Council. He says he talked to Bill Taylor, the ambassador, He and I discussed a lack of, shall we say, OPSEC, that's operational security, that much of Rudy's discussions were happening over an unclassified cell phone, or perhaps as bad, WhatsApp messages, and therefore you can only imagine who else knew about them. Now think about this. Even though WhatsApp is encrypted, when it arrives on your phone or when it is sent from the sender's phone, it's not encrypted. And we've got dirt boxes, we've got stingrays that enable us to access people's phones, read their messages, copy their contacts, all that kind of stuff. And so do people like Giuliani and Sondland think the Russians are so backward that they don't have surveillance gear like that? At minimum, it appears to be very careless. Oh, that was the language of James Comey, referring to Hillary Clinton's email system. Almost a year to the day since Russia seized a tugboat and 2 gunboats from Ukraine at the Kerch Strait, Russia has returned those boats. The sailors who were detained for 10 months returned home in September. And there was a prisoner swap between Afghanistan and the Taliban that released an American and an Australian who'd been held hostage for 3 years. The American is Kevin King, the Australian Timothy Weeks, and they were teachers at Kabul's American University. Now they are free birds. The Trump administration, as you know, engineered this silly scheme where they're pretending that people who seek asylum in the United States must first go to a third country and apply. And so we are about to send a plane load of people who claim asylum, who are in the United States. We're going to send them to Guatemala, where they can apply for asylum there, we say. But internal documents from the Department of Homeland Security show that they already know that sending them there is just an empty process. Quote, there is uncertainty as to who will provide orientation services for migrants, as well as who will provide shelter, food, transportation, and other care. So we're just sending them to Guatemala, a country with one of the highest crime rates, with one of the highest starvation rates in the entire world. And we're saying, hey, prove your asylum case from there. And we'll deny it. The Jeffrey Epstein so-called suicide is now producing criminal charges against 2 of the jailers, employees of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, who were supposed to be on duty on the overnight shift that led to the discovery at 6:30 a.m. that Epstein was dead in his cell. The 2 individuals are Tova Noel, a female, and Michael Thomas. Each has 3 to 10 years of experience working in the prison, and they were both on overtime. Noel was doing 2 shifts back-to-back. They were sitting at a desk 15 feet from Epstein's cell. Now, you know he had been on suicide watch, then they took him off. That was August 10th. And he was supposed to have a cellmate, but suddenly he didn't on the night that he expired. And, of course, the New York Times refers to those of us who doubt that it was a suicide as conspiracy theorists. Quote, the indictment backed up the medical examiner's finding and appeared to rebut a conspiracy theory suggesting Epstein didn't kill himself. It said only corrections officers on duty would have had access to the unit where he was being held, and security camera video suggested that only 2 other officers entered the unit during that time. Well, can we see that footage? Not so far. And if he died either under his own auspices or at the hands of another, why was there no noise? And I don't want to be too crude here, but if you hang yourself, one of the first things that happens is you lose control of your bowels and your bladder. There would be a significant smell if someone had offed himself overnight 15 feet away from the desks of these guards. So Noel and Thomas have admitted that they falsified forms, 75 entries, claiming that they had conducted checks, And the video surveillance shows that for part of the time, at least 2 hours, both of these people sat at their desks without moving. And they weren't online because they were able to check the records of the computers. They were likely asleep. And finally, on the Epstein case, they're bringing in the undertaker. That's what I call Kenneth Feinberg. He was the guy who passed out the money to survivors of 9/11 victims. Then he was brought in to pass out BP's money to those who were harmed by the massive oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. He also passed out money in settlements from ignition problems that killed people driving General Motors cars. So he's got quite a business, and now the dirty money of the Epstein estate is going to be passed through the hands of the undertaker, who will try to silence the victims by engineering private settlements and payoffs. And I'm pleased to see that at least one of the victims has said, "No way, I'm suing." Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it absolutely everywhere. You'll find it on YouTube. And I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.